Hello, I'm Donovan Bigelow, and this is the third hour in a series on infant development. I'll begin with a text by Barbara Drysdale called The Provision of Primary Experience. This is part of a continuing discussion about the necessary, healthy infant developmental process. This is about what babies need really. Now, I also have to apologize again because I will be doing a fair amount of reading from critical texts throughout the series. I made the decision that I'd rather get the material right because it's so important than rely on some short summary of my own. So please, as best you can, focus on the content that I'm delivering, and forgive me for doing some reading that isn't exactly the best way in terms of teaching technique to deliver the material, but I think the value of the material makes it a reasonable choice. The first thing Dr. Drysdale describes, and is something I thought I touched on in the previous sessions, but it seems to me now more and more important to be clear about it from the beginning. And that's that there are two types of reality. There's external reality, what we usually call reality, the truth about things in the world, and psychic reality, the thing that Freud laid down initially. And he said that psychic reality was more powerful than external reality. And for the longest time, that made no sense to me. How could that possibly be? And then I started working with patients who were addicts. I started working with patients who were depressed. I started working with patients across the spectrum of mental illness. And every single time, without exception, what they proved to me was that psychic reality was more powerful than external reality. Here's the complication for babies, infants. Babies don't seem to have either a clear sense of external reality or a clear sense of their own inner reality. It's a bit of an illusion. There seems to be a mix. What I think makes most sense from the perspective of a baby is that reality, external reality, is provided entirely through the parents. The baby's ability to, as it grows older, deal with the truth of external reality depends entirely on how effectively the parents have introduced the baby to that reality through their own experience. The baby will take in the parent's experience. The baby will identify with, introject, resonate with the parent's dynamic, especially the mother. If the mother is healthy and strong, if the father is healthy and strong, and their sense of inner and outer reality is stable and healthy, then that's what the child takes in. If their relationship is primarily loving and nurturing and respectful, then the child takes that in literally and directly as a model for its subsequent relationships. So we have to back up and think about a baby's reality as utterly different from an adult's reality, and that the focus on infant development has to be mediating that developmental sense of reality through the mother's mind and the father's. So, and Dr. Drysdale is one of the few analysts I've read who writes in almost poetic terms. She avoids almost entirely a kind of psychoanalytic or psychology dogma or language that's so technical it's hard to make sense of. So bear with me, this is worth reading. Only as the baby obtains enough primary experiences from his mother, her breasts, her arms, her smile, can any baby change slowly from being contained by the mother to being himself a container of inner reality. A child's view of outer reality will depend upon his inner world. Should this be peopled by tormenting devils and raging monsters, then outer reality will be a threatening and terrible place. The baby who has been constantly deprived and frustrated is full of helpless rage, the devils and monsters, which one day may be seen as panic, violence, murder, and destruction. Only the infant who has had good enough early experiences can gradually, in the course of the first year, become a person, reaching the realization that his mother is another separate person from himself in outer reality. By then, however, he has incorporated her symbolically into his inner world and is ready to be disillusioned through her external failure to make perfect adaptations to his needs, providing that this failure happens very gradually, so that slowly the golden age is forgotten, that mechanisms which Freud called primary repression takes place, and the baby comes to love and hate his mother as a real living person in the world. But that means the baby is him or herself also ready to be a person in the real world and dealing with people in that way, to be able to see the mother as a whole person, instead of just this fantasy, all-powerful, omnipotent object whose sole purpose in life is to serve the baby. The baby will be failed by the mother in a healthy, appropriate way when everything works well. The question is, has that failure, quote unquote, gone slowly enough, spread out over the course of the first year or two, or even perhaps 3? Has the disillusion from that perfection of symbiotic oneness been so gradual as to be non-traumatic? Because that's the central question here. Any transition, any change that is traumatic, which by definition means not what the parents think is traumatic or what they may in their practical lives feel like is necessary for the family, but from the perspective of the baby, what is the baby experiencing when this change happens? If it's more than the baby's nascent, not fully formed sense of self can tolerate, we have the very definition of trauma. And that derails the slow ongoing development of the baby's self. All right, providing, again quoting, providing that he has had this good enough experience, he can stand the painful realities, both the outer and the inner kind, learn to tolerate frustration, to contain his anger and his hate, anxiety and envy, as well as his love and trust. In the same way, he can stand bumps and cuts and bruises, all the minor hurts of early childhood, if his mother is there to comfort him. A stomachache can cease to be being felt as persecution. Now, this may be one of the most difficult things for modern parents to tolerate. It was the most powerful thing that got Freud in trouble very early on. In 1905, when he presented his 3 essays on sexuality and suggested, to the shock and horror of virtually all of the European medical establishment, that very young children had something like a proto-sexuality that they were acting out quite frequently and had in their minds some proto-sexual thoughts, feelings, dynamics, fantasies. This just horrified everyone, it seemed, and Freud was all but isolated for the better part of a decade. Well, it turns out, I think, Freud was right in that we have underestimated the complexity of infant minds. And I think we're still doing it today. We have underestimated the emotional complexity of infants' minds. And the idea that a baby could hate its mother and father with a kind of fantasized destruction and hostility and aggression that almost blows the mind is almost intolerable to experience as a parent. And yet it appears that the consistent clinical evidence and the research in this seems to say it's true. Babies, young toddlers certainly, have intense emotional experiences across the spectrum. When they love passionately and fully. When they hate in the same way. They swing wildly between emotional extremes. It is up to the parents to contain them. And I'll come back to this, but the idea is the difference between health and illness is not that you have severe swings of emotions, but it's that they can be rather quickly and reasonably contained. A baby who has swings of emotion, but then can be calmed, can be contained by a present mother, is not going to be considered problematic. A baby, a toddler, a young child, an adolescent, who cannot get out of a severe panic, a severe rage, a severe depression, will very quickly be seen as abnormal and problematic and ill. So it's not the nature of the emotions. We all have intense emotions. It's the nature of the degree to which we've internalized the maternal containing object. Can we, having had that experience from the mother and father, can we internalize it sufficiently to contain our own emotional swings? That That dynamic, that question, the answer to it, is the core of all infant development, I believe. What is an infant doing when it's playing? Babies, it appears, have a feed at the breast, and they will then pause for a moment, and they will play with the nipple, and they will pause and look at their mother's faces, and if they can reach it, they will play with an earlobe, a nose. When held by the father, they will play with a beard or a mustache. They will pull at the face, and they're curious about it. How does that happen? Why does that happen? How can it be facilitated? Because it appears that what's going on psychically in the child is that this playfulness is a prerequisite to more adolescent and adult creativity. The child is exploring their world with curiosity. There are, in neurology, and I touched on this in the last lecture, it appears that there are two primary neural circuits in the growing infant brain now, not mind. There is the attachment circuitry, where does the infant go when stressed, the clinging to the mother, the need for protection, and there is the exploratory, the curiosity. Melanie Klein she called it the epistemophilic instinct. Epistemology, the study of the acquisition of knowledge. She actually thought that curiosity was an instinct that was in human nature, and I think she's right about that all babies, when treated with a good enough experience, want to explore the world, and the world begins with the mother's body. So that curiosity has to be facilitated by a safe enough environment. If the child is drenched in their own internal reality of fear, anger, resentment, envy, difficulties, anxiety, they will cling in attachment dynamics to the mother or whoever is there to contain them because they are afraid, because they feel imminent danger. Only when they're safe enough can that neurological circuitry relax, sufficient for the baby's attention to be moved outside in a curious way. If that doesn't happen, if there isn't enough safety, then the curiosity cannot be facilitated. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is the core of all infant, child, and adolescent learning disorders. It's not cognitive. It is not about a poorly facilitated language skill. It is much more primitive than that, much more residing in right brain neural circuitry involving the difference between attachment and exploratory dynamics. It's much more about love than fear. I think in order to explore with curiosity, the infant from the mother and father has to take in more love than fear. If they can do that, if they feel internally, because their reality is the parent's reality to begin with, if the reality taken in by the infant from the mother's mind is more strength than fear, more love than hate, more peace than anxiety, then the infant will very naturally and very spontaneously start exploring, be curious, be confident that the world is a safe place because that's their inner experience of it. So creativity and play in the child has to be facilitated. If the baby is playing, if the baby is having an experience of the mother's body that seems to be curiously fun to the baby, let it. If there's something else to be done, perhaps let it wait a little while. Let the mother and the father recognize the psychic meaning of the child's, of the infant's behavior in the moment. What are they doing? This is where the parents have to be mindful of the difference between external reality, the need to go to work, the need to get a job done, the need to get dinner on the table, the need to take the garbage out. Got it. That's important stuff. But if we don't get the internal reality of the infant's developmental needs privileged in some meaningful way, then the downstream effects of that are going to be unpleasant. Okay. If one is not living securely within reality oneself, one cannot help someone else to do so. maybe the most important sentence I say in the last several hours. This is to the parents. You can't give what you weren't given by someone. If you're not healthy, if you have issues, if you have addictions, if you have neuroses, if you have anxieties, if you have depressions, if you have whatever it is you have, that you have some sense is being generated by your own developmental derailments, your own issues, they must by all means be addressed. This is exactly parallel to the airplane notices that parents get every time they fly. The mother, the father need to put the mask on themselves before they can help the child, because a passed out mother or father is of no help to the children. If you are not, and this I've never read it better said, if one is not living securely within reality oneself, one cannot help someone else to do so. So the problem most of the time, and this is the painful part, the problem almost all the time is not the children, is not their problems that appear to the parents to be external and behavioral. The problem is the parents. 99 times out of 100, it is some neurotic derivative in the parents. It is some conflict in the parents' own unresolved developmental experience that is now being transferred to the child, and the child is acting it out. I don't think I've ever seen a case, except for organic brain damage, neurological disorders that are identifiable as neurological disorders, a kind of genetic or physiological brain damage, and those are nowadays really quite easy to detect for the most part. If there isn't an identifiable brain damage cause, then what we have, I'm going to say 99 times out of 100 minimum, is a projected, a transferred neurotic conflict from the parents into the child, which the child does not have the ability to contain the way the parents have managed up until now. We inflict these things on our children to a large degree, and the parents have to be the responsible ones to take the truth of that into themselves, and honestly, if they're going to protect their children, if they're going to stop the intergenerational transmission of trauma, it is incumbent on parents to do an honest and courageous self-assessment of where these family problems are coming from, and the answer is virtually automatic. They're coming from the parents. Now, am I blaming the parents? No. There's no blame here. There cannot be blame. When I get to the third part, the second part of the lecture series and talk about autism and other childhood difficulties, we are so far beyond blame now. We aren't beyond responsibility, though. The blame can go back to grandparents, to great-grandparents, to Darwin or Adam and Eve, for all I care about it. So we cannot go down that road because it generates defenses, it generates resistance, which is not helpful. But we do have to be honest about the reality of an infant's developmental requirements, and what they require is healthy parents. If there is some way to fix that before you have children, and if you've had them already, if there's some way to heal those wounds and help the children heal the wounds that are inevitably part of a family where this transmission of trauma is going to happen, then find the courage and make the changes. The thing that I have discovered in my own clinical practice, working with men and women into their late 60s, is that it's never too late. And when I see adults with adult children making dramatic changes in their life, and those changes then are presented to the children over time, because they have to be, then what I see consistently is the children feeling inspired to make more changes themselves. I don't think it is ever too late. Call me naively optimistic about this, but I don't think it's ever too late to make the changes that can make everyone's life better. All right. And Dr. Drysdale continues, and what about terrible objective reality, which in itself seems mad? The awful things that human beings do to other human beings. How are children to come to terms with war, with murder, with torture? Perhaps the answer is by letting them know us as real people, as good and bad, as loving and hating, enabling them to tolerate the reality of being a human being among other human beings. If parents present themselves as always right, wise, and good to their children, they are offering something delusional. Illusion is fine for babies, but toddlers need to have reached disillusionment, to have come to know their parents as people who can get into difficulties, as the toddlers do themselves. There's a kind of mutual respect based on reality, knowing each other, really knowing each other, which idealized, illusory parents will never reach with their families. And I've had this direct experience as a therapist. The moments in therapy where I find the most transformative potential is where I make a mistake, not intentionally, but I catch myself. I do something, I say something that causes the patient difficulty. I misinterpret. I say something that hurts their feelings somehow. And when I catch myself doing that, I immediately apologize. And what I find, and again, virtually without exception, is that that moment where a therapist, who in the patient's eyes is often idealized, when the patient sees me make a mistake, take responsibility for the mistake, apologize, repair the damage to whatever extent there was damage, and make a firm good faith commitment not to do it again or to try extraordinarily hard not to do it again, the patient is relieved of anxiety. Why? Because if the parent is perfect, then the child has to be perfect, and the child cannot be perfect, and therefore they assume persecution, they assume guilt, they assume anxiety and the fear of abandonment. And so I think what Dr. Drysdale is talking about here is the potential, and the emphasis has to be on the timing of it, that this has to be a very slow process. An 18-month-old does not want to hear about mommy and daddy's dirty laundry. That's not what we're talking about. It has to be calculated, titrated, in accordance with the developmental needs of the infant, toddler, young child, adolescent. There are things adult children don't want to hear about their parents and shouldn't have to. This is a question of art, of judgment, of maturely seeing the psychic reality of the children and their developmental needs, not what I need to get off my chest. That is, more often than not, when it's inflicted on the children in ways that don't work for the children, again, the parent's neurotic conflict being acted out projectively. Last quote. Babies and small children need an unchanging environment. One can think of the mother as the first environment. As they gradually establish their own inner reality, they can tolerate outer reality and all sorts of change in themselves and others. If all goes well, they can go on changing and tolerating change for the rest of their lives, but only if life has seemed more constant to them in that first year than it can ever be in reality. This is the necessary reality, psychic reality, that the parents provide. A stable, consistent, reliable emotional presence is the most central necessity of infant development. Now, moving on. It seems essential to talk for a moment about prenatal development. I think this is a brand new area, virtually brand new, just say in the last 10 years. It actually made the cover of Time magazine, October 4th, 2010. The cover of Time magazine had a picture of a very pregnant woman. How the first 9 months shape the rest of your life, the new science of fetal origins. And the idea is that up until fairly recently, the assumption was that everything of importance happens after birth, that the fetus inside the mother's womb is in this idyllic, calm, weightless, stressless environment where everything is lovely and natural. And it turns out most of the best research in the last 15, 20 years says that it is sometimes like that, but very, very often it is not. And here's a quote from Freud from 1926 that I think is prescient, as so much that he said was. Quote, "There is much more continuity between the intrauterine life and earliest infancy than the impressive caesura of the act of birth would have us believe. Caesura meaning the cut, the split, the break between fetal existence and neonatal life. He continues, what happens is that the child's biological situation as a fetus is replaced for it by a psychical object relation to its mother. Now, I have heard that described as justifying the necessity of continuity, as much continuity as is reasonably possible between the prenatal life, this presumed ideal prenatal life of the baby, and the immediate postnatal experience of the newborn. And in some ways that makes perfect sense. What has the baby been experiencing internally? Very close containment, physiological containment, an completely present emotional link to the mother and the growing fetus's mind. It seems very clear now, given the various scans that can be done of the prenatal infant in the womb, that the brain is functioning at a sufficiently complex neuronal mass to assume something like a primitive form of sentience, sometimes around 3.5 months. Now, this is somewhat disputed and it's a little bit complicated because we're in areas where it's hard to get hard science. But it looks fairly clearly from the scanning technologies that there is a complex brain involved, and there's enough neuronal activity and enough firing of the neuronal circuitry to assume some at least primitive form of sentience. That sentience is being accessed by the mother back and forth. I've worked with several pregnant women in my therapy practice, and I have known several pregnant women, and without exception, at some point around midterm of the pregnancy, maybe a little later, every pregnant woman I have personally known and most I have heard about develop an active, emotional, intimate, intuitive, empathic, resonant relationship with that fetus. They talk to it, they feel it, they carry on conversations with it, and it doesn't seem anthropomorphic. It doesn't seem that they're adultomorphizing these infants. It feels like there's a real relationship there. And I think if it was onesies or twosies, and this is the material from a text by Alessandra Pontinelli, entitled From Fetus to Child, that's Pointelli, P-I-O-N-T-E-L-L-I, From Fetus to Child, an Observational and Psychoanalytic Study. What they did was they did hundreds of careful, high-tech ultrasounds of fetuses throughout the pregnancy, and they observed them weekly or multiple times a week throughout the entire course of the pregnancy, hundreds of these. And the results were the same. The researchers were surprised, astonished even, at the amazing individuality of the fetal responses to the maternal body, to circumstances, to situations, to feeding, to food in the mother. Every unique attribute of an individual appears through the scanning technologies to be present at some rudimentary level, especially midway to the rest of the pregnancy. And it inevitably leads to at least a tentative hypothesis, at least a working model, that there is a sentience there, that there is a mind there that needs to be connected with. Now, what does that mean? Well, we've always been taught that the continuity question is that if the fetal experience is one of containment and warmth and consistency and not a lot of loud noises, then the baby should be swaddled comfortably. The lights should be a bit dim. Voices should be soft. Doors should not be banged. Rock and roll should not be playing loudly. That kind of continuity makes perfect sense. To do things differently almost inevitably feels like trauma to the baby. And you've seen this. I have been in a room with a baby and someone slams the door. There is a startle reaction and the baby immediately spikes either an anger or an anxiety emotional feeling and goes into either a rageful or a fearful cry. radical changes in environment lacking continuity to the prenatal period are going to inevitably be traumatic. Now, here's what we are finding now. It isn't ideal. The evidence suggests that everything the mother is experiencing physiologically and, most importantly, emotionally is having a direct, immediate effect on the fetus. If the mother is depressed, if the mother is anxious, if the mother is distracted, fearful, whatever, then we are having both a physiological reaction, a stress response, the hormones, the cortisol, the various chemical, the adrenaline is being dumped into the baby through the placental cord. And there is no chance the baby isn't being affected by not just the emotional context of the mother, but by her physiological context as well. It turns out if the mother is under tremendous stress, the baby is under tremendous stress, at the level, given its vulnerability, that the word trauma seems important. Prenatal trauma. A very old quote. Before this ultrasound technology much developed and before the research like this was being done, there's a quote from Judith Matrani's great text, Taking the Transference. She says, Winnicott, Bick, and Tustin, three of the most important infant researchers and psychoanalysts, Winnicott, Bick, and Tustin each recorded references, both verbal and nonverbal, to certain primitive fears that date back to the earliest state of unintegration, as these appear in both adult and child patients. These primitive fears are the terrors of non-being, of falling forever, dissolving in liquid, evaporating in air, spilling out uncontrollably, leaking everywhere, all without any possibility of recovery. These fears are thought to be connected with a traumatic awareness of bodily separateness from the mother before a psychic apparatus has developed sufficiently to tolerate and transform them. Tustin referred to the aberrant behaviors of children who were born with certain pervasive developmental disorders as, quote, prenatal aversion reactions, unquote. She cited clinical material that seemed to demonstrate how some children have suffered disturbances in utero and so are both prone to these disorders from birth. Since psychophysical existence of the fetus and mother are still interwoven during pregnancy or around delivery, any trauma to the mother resulting in extremes of depression or anxiety has an impact on the child's psychic development and sense of ongoing security even before birth. I don't think that that can meaningfully be argued with now, given the neurological research, given the scanning technologies available, given the genetic research, the epigenetic studies. This seems to me to be the very cutting edge prenatal development tied to the mother's emotional and physical well-being. We must care for our infants long before they are born by caring for the mothers and ensuring the mother's mental health as best we can. More on prevention later. I have to address very briefly the question of when life begins, because that's a firestorm I don't really want to get into, but I don't see any way to avoid it, at least briefly. I have for years said, in complete agreement with religious people, lawyers, neurologists in hospitals, that death occurs at brain death. There doesn't appear to be in our society any argument anymore about when death happens. If you are declared brain dead by neurologists, you are considered dead by everyone else. No one argues anymore. There are some argument about whether that diagnosis is accurate. But if the diagnosis is accurate, that is the now effectively universally accepted definition of when death happens. Okay, if that's the definition of when death happens, when does life happen? And my tentative answer has been when there's enough neuronal mass in the growing fetus's brain to assume some rudimentary sense of sentience, of self-awareness. that seems to occur again, roughly 3.5 to 4 months, give or take a little bit. Okay? There's no brain right after conception, and there certainly is a fully functional present brain at 8 months plus. No question about that. So let's assume for the sake of argument that we want to be consistent with death and life. We must assume that there's a life, legal life, protectable life, when that critical moment of neuronal critical mass can be determined as a medical event to have happened. Now, I realize that right away I make two completely different categories, two completely different groups in our society angry. I anger the radical feminists who want abortion on demand up through late-term abortions, which in this way of thinking would be nothing short of murder. But I also anger the religious, those with devout fundamentalist religious convictions, because a blob of protoplasm 24 hours after conception under this way of thinking is a blob of protoplasm and may be done with by the pregnant woman in the same way she would do with a hangnail. Now that seems harsh, but I'm trying to be extreme here for heuristic purposes to teach. I had thought that idea about brain neuronal mass would be a good thing to stand on. I'm no longer so sure. And the reason is this research on the potential. Because if we can take it back to 3.5 months of pregnancy in the fetal womb, aren't we able to go back a little farther? Now here's where the research stops. This is the edge that we're on, and I don't know where it's going. There's been some research, an article by Stephen M. Maret, M-A-R-E-T, PhD, professor of psychology at Caldwell University, Frank Lake's maternal fetus distress syndrome. What he's describing there is research that seems to suggest from virtual conception on, we have not just the potential for life, but a life that is in a kind of a symbiotic reaction with the mother's body, that there is a potential there for the mother. No, there is the reality that the mother's body and mind, maybe, to interact with the early fetus in ways that directly affect the fetal development, the development of the mind, and the postnatal developmental experiences of the baby. The argument, at least, is that we have been pushing back developmental primacy since Freud's day for the last 110 years. We've been pushing it back from adolescence to childhood to early childhood to infancy. We're now clearly in the prenatal period. How do we stop this? When do we say, okay, this is really when it starts? I'm not sure. But I think I can say this consistent with the scientific evidence. From conception, the mother's mind and the mother's body is having an immediate, moment-to-moment, direct impact on the developmental trajectory of the fetus. Of that, there is no longer any meaningful doubt in the science, and that effect becomes magnified dramatically once the neuronal mass of the fetal brain expands to the point of some sense of sentience. I think that's a reasonable position to take, politics on either side notwithstanding. Okay, back to psychoanalytic developmental psychology and developmental neuropsych. I want to spend some time reviewing one of the most important books on child development I've ever read, and that's by Miller and her colleagues, called Closely Observed Infants. What we have are some researchers who have spent years and years sitting with mothers and babies, observing intimately, closely, seemingly endlessly, and their conclusions are fascinating and useful. And I think I've introduced the idea of reverie in one of the previous lectures, but I will come back to it again and again. What's needed? Reverie in the face of the infant's primitive emotional communications requires containment of confusing experiences until their meaning becomes clearer. Now, what I mean by reverie, I'm going to come back to this. Reverie, the experience of a mother who's sitting with her baby, and she's healthy, and she's whole, and she's mostly contented and happy to be there, isn't distracted by the outside world too much, can focus her attention on the baby. The reverie is her openness to being stirred up by the baby's experience, the sensitivity, almost a hypersensitivity, to the nuances of the baby's moods, feeling states, emotional responses, the projections of the baby's anxiety. The mother picks these up like a finely tuned radar. The ability to do that is what is absolutely necessary. This type of mental function requires a capacity to tolerate anxiety, uncertainty, discomfort, helplessness, and a sense of bombardment. That's what a baby will do to a mother. Confused, we don't know, they don't have language, they can't tell us what's wrong, right? So we have to tolerate the anxiety that's in the baby, but is also in ourselves. Oh my God, what's wrong? My baby's crying. I must do something. Well, no. You must not do something first. That would be the exact wrong thing to do. That would be an acting out of your own anxiety. What you must do first is sit in a reverie of understanding, of openness to the baby's experience, and understand what's going on really before you do something just because you need to do something, which almost never actually equates to doing the thing the baby needs. You're doing it because you need to do it, because if you don't do it, you're having anxiety you can't tolerate. You are not containing yourself. If you can't stay in reality, your own psychic reality as well as external reality, you can't help the baby do so. You have to be able to tolerate anxiety, uncertainty, discomfort, helplessness, and a sense of bombardment. This requires profound levels of strength, integration, wholeness, patience, courage. All the things healthy people are supposed to be able to do without too much trouble. But the very things that a new mother who had her own developmental derailments too much and too unaddressed in her own development is going to have a hard time doing. But if she can't, then she's already going to be missing what the baby needs. And the baby will be taking in her conflicts instead of a soothing presence. Okay, so I want a digression here slightly. We have to be very careful. There is no way to draw a causal link in a direct linear way between an infantile failure of empathy on a mother's part or a particular trauma and some mental illness issue in adolescence or adulthood. That isn't how the human mind develops. It is an accumulation over time. I'll come back to this again, but it is an emotional environment within the home that creates a foundation, the building blocks of a mind. If there is a trauma, it is dealt with in the context of these larger day-to-day experiences. I'll come back to that. So I am focusing not on particular traumas. I have had patients over and over come in, sit down in one of my chairs and say, okay, I'm having this problem. I'm an addict. I'm depressed. I can't be in a healthy relationship. I'm angry all the time. I've been fired 3 times from my job. And I've got to get back to what happened. Did my mom drop me on my head? Did my dad, slap me around? I want to find that moment in time that explains all my destructive behaviors. And my answer is there's no such thing. There is no finding that magic time that explains it all. And I actually gently and as respectfully as I can suggest that need to know it all is actually part of the problem, because there's so much we cannot know, and you must be comfortable with not knowing. The need to know drives us to pretend we know things we don't, and that is not an improvement. That is a defense. That is a denial of both external reality and psychic reality. If we don't resolve those things before becoming parents, we pass them on to our children. Okay, from closely observed infants. Since the early 1970s, developmental psychology has demonstrated through a massive research the innate capacities of the newborn and how they add up to an urgent need for and ways of seeking out and making use of precisely those aspects of the environment which in ordinary circumstances are most available to the human newborn, namely the various characteristics of a human caretaker, a mother. The baby is pre-programmed to search out a mother. The baby is pre-programmed, hardwired, evolutionarily determined to seek out a mothering experience. It's an astonishing thing to watch, and if you know what you're looking for, it becomes obvious very quickly. The psychoanalytic approach being described here has an additional focus of study, namely, what are the beginnings in the neonate of those processes which, in time, will enable the infant to develop a sense of his own mind, i.e., an awareness of complex psychological emotional states in himself and others. This is the goal. This is the central goal of infant development. How does a mind form? I'm going to come back at this from several different directions, but right now it appears that the central way this works is quite literally, again, a taking in of the mother's mind. That you don't learn this. It isn't a cognitive function. It isn't what you're told. It isn't what you observe. It is entirely an unconscious, emotional, empathic resonance where literally the identity, the self of the mother is experienced, introjected, identified with. We have words that describe a process that really is beyond words, but that's how it feels. The baby takes in the mother's own experience. The mother creates the mind in the child by literally transferring her own mind, as does the father, to the baby's nascent receptive self. And it is an astonishing thing to watch. And you almost find that Kleinian thirst for knowledge, that epistemophilic instinct, not just in the exploration of the mother's body and toys and things in the outside world. I haven't read this anywhere, I just thought this up. It seems to me that the most potent source that the infant wants to explore is the mother's mind itself. That what truly rewards the infant's curiosity is the presence of a loving mother's mind available to the child to take in. That ultimately is the most foundational experience in the infant's existence. If that can happen, virtually all things will sort out. How does it happen? Well, there's a phrase that I think I used once before called primary maternal preoccupation. It's a phrase that Winnicott came up with in I believe, the early 30s. He was a pediatrician as well as a psychoanalyst. So primary maternal preoccupation, what is it exactly? A few months prior to birth, somewhere in the late term, a mother's hormonal, physiological, and neurological experience becomes narrowed, dialed down onto the existence of the fetus and soon to be neonate. I said before that talk to a mother of a newborn, and what does she want to talk about? Well, if she's healthy, nothing but the newborn. That is a perfectly normal response. And not only is it normal, I think it's more than normal. It's utterly necessary to provide that cocoon, that postnatal experience of a continuity of being held. The baby was held by the mother's body. Now the baby is held by the mother's mind. The psychic experience has continuity to it. If the mother cannot hold the child's psyche in mind, if the mother cannot, in this way of primary maternal preoccupation, spend most of her time dialed into the child's experience, mind, self, if there isn't this attunement ongoing, Not 24/7, of course. The mother must engage in self-care, but primary maternal preoccupation. Then the child is not contained, and the child experiences that inevitably as a traumatic derailment of its needed development. Here's the complication about primary maternal preoccupation. It evokes in the mother all of the pain that the baby is feeling. And we've described and established that babies feel all these terrible swings of emotion, both the good and the bad. A mother must be able to take in and feel all of those to know what the baby is feeling. But that means she must take in all these tremendously difficult, painful feelings. A mother will be stirred up by her baby. What if she can't handle it? What if that feeling of rage, fear, anxiety, horror, what if that evokes in her uncontained developmental fear, anxiety, horror? Then the baby can be seen as a threat. The baby can be seen as a terror, as dangerous, as a monster. And women in this situation will neglect, if not abuse, certainly abandon, emotionally, if not actually, their children. There was more than one study on daycare that suggested the mothers dropping their kids off in daycare did so in part because they had a sense that they were bad mothers, that they couldn't handle the child, that they couldn't help the child, and they hoped by getting rid of it that someone could do better than they could. This is about managing the mother's dynamic, not about the baby's developmental needs. You are supposed to be stirred up by primary maternal preoccupation. But you must be strong enough, healthy enough, integrated and whole enough to be able to contain, to sit with all of those anxieties, your own, which you bring to the table, and also those of the fetus. Now, I think there is something very parallel going on with fathers here. There's some split in the literature, in the research. Some researchers think that of course there can't be the hormonal parallel. All of the hormones of pregnancy and childbirth do not course through the father's veins, so there's no way he can feel a parallel primary maternal preoccupation. And the argument then is that there's a disconnect empathically between the mother and father, often generating resentment, frustration, a feeling of abandonment between both parties. The father feels neglected and abandoned. The mother feels neglected and abandoned exactly at the wrong time. At the time when the couple has to be more together than ever to provide a loving, integrated couple's relationship for the baby to take in. Because the baby will take in more than the mother and more than the father individually. They will also take in the mother and father's relationship. This will be the template. Whether it's good or bad, this will be the template for all of the subsequent babies' relationships as they grow into childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Get this one right, and the baby's life will mostly, as it develops into adulthood, will gravitate toward healthy relationships if it's taken in a healthy relationship. If it has not done that, if there's strife in the home, if the mother and father are at odds, if there's abandonment, you will find that is what the baby takes in. It becomes the building block for the baby's sense of self in the world, and they will literally search for the same kind of poisonous relationship. Freud called this transference. We now call it projective identification. It's just the intergenerational transmission of trauma. If we were neglected, abused, drenched in anxiety, those feelings, and this is the key to this repetition compulsion that Freud pointed out. It's astonishing, is it not? And I don't think anybody listening to this tape will ever doubt this, because they've seen people in their lives continue to do the same dumb thing over and over again, no matter how many times it goes wrong and ends up in disaster. And people and friends, they get frustrated. What are you doing? Why do you keep doing that? In our culture now, there's a joke. Insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result each time. How do you explain that insanity? Well, the answer is this, that you take in fear, anxiety, frustration, and it's better than abandonment. That is the absolute key to explaining Freud's repetition compulsion. Because the worst fear for a baby the absolute most catastrophic fear there is abandonment. There is no fear greater than that we can understand even remotely. So that hate, anger, frustration gets recreated in adolescence and adulthood. Why? Because it's the only kind of love they know, and it's better than abandonment. And I think that goes a long way in explaining people's silly behaviors. So, back to the closely observed infants. If the mother can avoid being disturbed in a way she can't contain, if she can contain that being emotionally stirred up by the baby, and simultaneously feeling her own infantile conflicts, dynamics being stirred up again by the baby, because that is going to happen. If the mother can contain that, then she has the possibility of identification with the baby. And that's the link that provides development. The mother will be present in the baby's presence in this nurturing, containing way. The mother can contain herself, can contain the baby's anxieties, metabolize them, think about them, hold them in mind, figure out what the baby really needs, and manage the baby's care in a way that not only takes care of its physiological needs, but takes care, as or more importantly, of the emotional context of the baby's development. One of the best thinkers in this area is Wilfred Bion, and he's cited here. It was Bion's thesis that the way in which a mother is able to get in contact with her baby's state of mind, and through her attention and support enable the baby to grow psychologically, constitute a form of relationship in which the mother's mind acts as a container for the baby. He called this relationship container-contained. Seems obvious. And he used it as a model for both for thinking about the development of the mind and also as an analog for other emotional relationships. This is the key part. In Bion's terms, this kind of receptivity to being stirred up emotionally is the basis for our capacity to be responsive in all those occasions throughout life when we are brought into intimate contact with someone else's state of mind. This isn't infant development. This is life. When two people enter a room, Bion said, there's a storm, there's a crisis. When two minds meet, there's always something happening at an intense level. Often, mostly unconsciously, sometimes not unconsciously. If you can contain that as an adult in the relationship with other adults, how many times have you lost your temper? How many times have you ended up in a conflict with a partner, spouse, friend, where voices were raised and hostile things were said? What happened? How did that happen? Well, the next day you either, blame the tequila or blame the other person for being a jerk. But the truth is, without exception, there's something being evoked in you that you couldn't contain. This is so brilliant in terms of Bion's formulation. The ability to name something so simple as a container, and yet so, I think, sort of profound in its developmental implications. The mother contains the baby. The father contains the mother. Both are necessary. Both are part, not just of the baby's individual development, but part of both of the parent's development as well. To be a man, to be a woman in this context, developmentally as an adult, requires that you do something profoundly difficult, that you re-access your own, sometimes, frequently, often, always, painful childhood developmental dynamics. Contain them all over again. Access them afresh in all of their potent power and pain. And be able to recognize through that containment of them the identification with the baby's pain. And if you can do that, mother and father, you will find the baby basking in the light of love. I don't know that there's a better definition for love than that experience that the baby has. All right. His mother's solidity in the face of his experience of falling apart seems to be the source of that rudimentary trust in himself and his surroundings, which allows the baby to relinquish his mother's external presence and enables him to begin to turn instead to internalized images of her. This is that moment where the baby, now having internalized enough good experience from the mother's mind and father's, can, having taken that in, experience itself as a self, experience the mother as a separate self, can begin to think for itself. And what I mean by thinking, I mean really thinking. I don't mean rote memorization. I don't mean just what you're told. I don't mean simple behavioral repetition. I mean the ability to think creatively, to think under fire, to think under pressure, to maintain a mind in the face of life's anxieties, to be able to go, wow, what is that about? As opposed to the need to do something right away. This is the payoff for doing this right. The baby internalizes a mind which it makes its own, which is in the neurological bedrock of the baby's developing brain, which itself is being activated by the internalized mother's right brain emotional connection. This is the epigenetics connection between neurology and the mind. Okay. As well as the actual moment-by-moment impact of experiences on the baby, images of experience are being stored in the memory, and in the process a world is being created within the baby. Ah, that's psychic reality. Psychic reality, more powerful than external reality for all of us, said Freud correctly, is nothing more than the internalization of the baby's loved experience of the mother, of being loved, of the mother's mind being available to it in a way that it can take in. Looked at in this way, the mother, in comforting her baby, in addition to her conscious attempts to think about and remove possible sources of distress, is also, one, allowing the baby's state of mind to make itself felt within her own mind without being overwhelmed, that's the key, and two, through the largely unconscious activity of her mind, the distress is given a shape and meaning which renders it more tolerable to the baby. This view of the process of comfort adds something to our ordinary common sense conception of it. Comforting, this is so important. Comforting is not conceived of solely in terms of the removal of the source of the distress or the distraction of the baby's attention. Those are the two things that almost everybody does all the time. And they're not bad things in and of themselves. Of course, if there's something causing harm and difficulty, change it, remove it, distract the baby. But that's not the developmental need of the baby by itself. It is conceived in terms of the impulse within the baby to project his distress into others and the mother's capacity to receive and tolerate this distress so that the experience is available for the baby to reintroject in a modified form. A little technical sounding stuff there, but you all know it's true. If you are sad, if you are in pain, if you are suffering, and a friend comes over and gives you a hug, and you feel understood, pain is lessened. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what they do. They don't have to do anything. But you know that empathic attunement lessens your pain. I think that is what the baby experiences in the presence of a loving mother when the baby is distressed. And you all know this experience. This is not some complicated technical psychobabble. This is not some esoteric theory. This reflects, I think, every person's real-world experience with emotional pain and its resolution. It's just putting it in this context and gives us all an opportunity to see how better to raise our children. I think if we get the truth of this, we will be much more likely to be better attuned to the people in our lives as adults. This lecture is not just about infant development. This is about life, I think, in a very direct way. All right, let me restate this again. The presence of his mother, her mental activity and capacity for response, transforms this situation by providing a receptacle for these bad experiences, and so allowing the formation of a primitive process of communication. She uses the phrase projective identification. I've touched on that before. Through projective identification, the infant is brought into contact with his mother as a container. Okay, I don't want to get technical. The baby evacuates all of its pain into the mother. The mother takes it, processes it, sits with it, waits, deeply metabolizes it. This may take a few seconds, it may take a few minutes, it may take as long as it takes. But then the mother is capable of translating it back to the baby and providing a soothing container, and the baby is relieved of its stress. And in that process, the baby takes in the process of the mother's soothing, and at some point with enough of that, provided in a good enough way, the baby then, for the most part, can do it for himself. And at that point, we have the psychological birth of the human infant. Okay. At this point, let's take a short break, and I will come back with the fourth hour. Thank you very much.